that whole slide deck presented, but I'll jump into the tools and show you guys the fun stuff. So my name is Eric, and I've been with JourneyTEAM a couple years here. Let me jump through this deck here. First of all, JourneyTEAM, we've been around for a while. We are a Microsoft partner. We're a managed partner. That means that we have specific integrations and support from Microsoft. We focus on their cloud practice. That's the world that I primarily live in. We also have practices that do SharePoint, Dynamics CRM, Dynamics GP or SL. And we're also an Okta partner, and I'll talk about who Okta is a little bit. So we kind of cover the identity and access management space with two of the leading vendors, Microsoft and Okta, in that use case. So depending on your needs and your use cases, one may be a better fit than the other, and so we can come in with an unbiased opinion. We're not just Microsoft partners. We look for the best solution for what your needs are in that space. So anyway, yeah, we make technology work the way you need it to. So that's our passion, to help enable the technology that you guys have to work the way it should for you. So a little bit about who I am. I've done IT my whole career. Ever since I was in like 7th grade, I knew I was going to do IT, and so I've had lots of different roles in the enterprise and things like that. I've been with JourneyTEAM a couple years as a full-time consultant. Love what I do. Different things I've done. If anyone ever has heard of GroupWise, I used to be a big GroupWise guy. Most of you probably never have, but that was another life. Anyway, I've written articles and books and published out there, and I just love to share and teach what I've learned and what I understand. And if anyone in IT tells you that they know everything, you should run away from that guy. So nobody knows everything. Anyway, but I love to learn and teach what I have experienced. So we're going to talk today about cybersecurity, basically, and to start laying the foundation around some of the new patterns and the new ways of looking and addressing cybersecurity in the world that we live in today. So before I get into this, I'm just really curious. I've got a little poll here that I want to pop up, and the question that I have, it's just a simple true or false question, right? So I'm curious what your guys' take on this is. Putting all of my data in the cloud weakens my cybersecurity posture. True, false, or I don't know. Where do you guys sit on that? And all right, I think we've got our responses there. 83% of you said no, that's false. 17% say they're not sure. So that's good to know. So with that, I've got one other poll I want to ask here, and that is just to get a feel for how many how many of you are using various cloud services. So there's the poll results there, 83% false, 17% say they don't know. And so here's one other poll here that I want to ask you guys. Okay, just to get an idea of relative to the cloud and the services there that are in the cloud, how many services are you guys leveraging today? All right, so nobody's got none. Awesome. And all right, pretty much between, okay, I think we can probably close that poll out, Dave, and
Okay,
let them see the
I'll
results
go ahead
of
and
that.
share that.
Cool.
Ready.
So 1 to 3, 4 to 6. So just beginning your cloud adoption. That's totally cool. I've got some customers that have 100 cloud services. It's kind of mind-boggling. Okay, so that helps me understand a little bit where you guys are coming from. So traditional cybersecurity wisdom, right? I've been doing IT a long time, and I remember the good old days where you had, you had your data center, you had your servers, your networks, your switches, your routers, your storage, your firewalls, etc. And we'd build a wall around our data and protect it from the internet, right? Keep the data inside the castle wall, secure it with a fancy layer 7 firewall, right? That was the latest rage. And then, of course, you had to poke holes through that firewall to give people access to the services that they need. And of course, our favorite feature is our username and password that's been around forever, okay, to get into the data. So the point of this is not necessarily reality today, okay? And so if we look at kind of the other reality that I would call it here, taking the castle mantra and the court gesture, right? You don't know who's inside your castle wall. But the fact of the matter is data has typically already left your castle wall. The idea of trying to say that my security is physical perimeter around my information is just not reality. And so your data is already not inside your ecosystem like you maybe think it is, which leads to internal breaches. So the guy inside the castle wall, who knows what he can do, or you have a failure of the system, opens up targets of opportunity for bad guys, disgruntled employees. That's always something to consider. Or the most common factor is just careless, or I would call it naive employees, right? Where they just don't understand the ramifications of this behavior, and they're just naive and don't understand it, or careless. Contractors and vendors, if any of you thought of Target when you saw that, that brings that to light. You have to give contractors or vendors access to your data when you're using those services. How do you secure and manage that? And most of the things are preventable in our world that we live in today. So that's the reality that we live in today. So that goes to some questions I'm going to answer here. Can you answer yes to these questions? So think about your environment, think about what you have going on, where your data is, what services you're using, and do you know who is accessing your data? Okay, and I've got a slide coming up here that kind of brings out a story around who's accessing your data. So do you know who's getting to your data? Can you grant access to your data based on risk in real time? Real time is a completely different requirement from a technological standpoint, and the risk factor based on the posture of someone or the activity that's going on. Another question is, can you protect your data on your devices in the cloud and in transit? We talked about, data doesn't live in your castle wall anymore. It's all over the place. And can you protect that while it leaves your castle wall and during transit, etc.? Can you quickly find and react to a breach? There's the idea, the FBI director said there's two types of companies out there. There's companies that that know they've been hacked, and there's companies that have been hacked. And so do you know when you've been hacked? And so that's an interesting, sobering thought, right? And the final question is, do your users love their current work experience? So that leads to the idea, as we raise the security bar, typically what happens to user functionality, it lowers or goes in the toilet, right? And users hate you because you've got all this security in place and you feel good about it, but they don't have a very good user experience. And so in today's day and age, there's functionality and technology, and I can show you some of that, of what's involved with raising that security bar, but really providing a good user experience at the same time, okay? So if you can answer yes to all these questions, then go save yourself 50 minutes of time and just keep doing what you're doing. If you can't answer yes to all these questions, then stay with me here, and we're going to show you some technologies that are going to help you get to where you can answer these questions. Okay, so now Dave, you watch to see if anyone drops off, all right? So, all right, let's go here. So here's a picture I want you to look at. There's a kind of a lot on this slide, but I want you to look at this. I pulled this data literally yesterday, okay? So take a look at what's on this slide, and what does this slide or this chart reveal? Okay, so I'm going to tell you guys a true story. I was working with one of our customers, and this functionality was recently released, and I said, hey, let me show you something really cool. And I brought up this chart, and the thing that we loved about it was this little map of the world. And this is a chart that shows where on the planet every single successful authentication event has taken place for Office 365 authentication. Okay, so this is great, right? It's using Power BI. It's a Microsoft reporting and analytical charting functionality that they've got in the cloud. And it took us about 5 minutes to pull up this data from never seeing it, right? So we pulled up this chart and we said, oh, this is really cool. Look where on the planet people have been logging in to our Office 365 tenant. And this is coming from my tenant here. And so do you guys have the ability to do this, right? That first question of who's accessing your data. So true story here, we looked at this chart, and literally 3 days prior, we see a couple of little bubbles. One of them is in South Africa, and one of them is Thailand. And I asked my customer, I says, you don't have any offices in South Africa or Thailand, do you? And of course, he says, no, we don't have offices in those locations. And so we drilled into this data. It's super easy, right? You just hit the heat map there, drill into that bubble, and it's going to tell us who has been logging in from that location. It gives us the IP address, it gives us the username, the user agent string, the time of day, what application they accessed, etc. And we found 2 users that had successfully logged in from South Africa and Thailand. Well, we get on the phone with these users, and the first user we call, we says, hey, have you been in Thailand recently? And the lady says, oh yes, I just got back from vacation there. It was so wonderful, thanks for calling. And she was thrilled that we had called her about her trip, right? So she was a legitimate user in Thailand, went on vacation and had access to her data from that location. We called the user that had logged in from Africa, and of course the guy didn't know what we were talking about. And so this heat map allowed us to easily see that here his bad guy with good credentials, we call it. Okay, and so that led to lots of fun discussions and remediation acts and things like that. Okay, now that was all reactionary behaviors that we did, right? Hey, we had this map, we could see who had accessed the data, and oh wow, that doesn't look normal, and then we went and took action. Okay, but there's the ability to take that one level further and have policies inside the system that will do things to prevent that from happening automatically real time. Okay, so I tell that story just because the world that we live in today, all of you are using some cloud services. Okay, and so that leads to the question of what sits between your data in the cloud and a bad guy with good credentials. Think about that for a second, right? What's sitting between your data in the cloud, which of course is accessible from anywhere there's an internet connection on the planet, and a bad guy that knows one of your users' credentials, okay? Which that brings up the idea of phishing or spear phishing, okay? And maybe that's a poll question I should ask here, but how many of you have heard of phishing or specifically spear phishing or have been a victim of that, right? That's not an uncommon thing in the world that we live in today. The concept of mass email to people, you know, a large net to try to get someone to click on something, the people are wising up to that, and so they're moving to the concept of spear phishing. I was doing some training for a team a few months ago, and I asked people if anyone had ever been spear phished. And this good old boy raises his hand and says, yeah, it's really awesome. I caught this, I don't remember what kind of fish he said, but I caught this fish with it. It was great. And we had a good laugh about it, right? But the idea of spear phishing is clearly a individual target that is gone after with very deliberate and specific tactics. So what we see and what we've seen with clients is where bad guy is specifically targeting individuals. And another true story here is where bad guy learns all kinds of information about the company. He learns about who's in what role, and based on whatever methods, he may actually get access to some person's mailbox in the system. And there's a treasure trove of information sitting in your mail. You may not realize that, but really anyone in your company, if a bad guy has access to their mail, they can learn all kinds of things about your organization. Not just people in the organization as far as what positions they hold, but what's happening inside your org as far as business opportunities, new developments, deals, et cetera, et cetera. And they'll use all that data to then put together spear phishing attacks. And they will send a specially crafted email that looks like a reply to a conversation that's already been going on, and they'll go target something like that. So that's happening in our world today. So this, hopefully you all have a nice little dashboard that you can pull up that's going to show you things like this, right? Where people are signing into and what's happening and how to then deal with that. So how creds get stolen, I kind of talked about that. 30% of people that get a phishing email will actually open the thing. 12 will open the attachment within 4 minutes. Hopefully you guys are all better than that. Using same credentials across multiple systems. Once your system gets, one system gets their creds dumped or compromised, and then they use that to pivot to other systems. There's a solution out there. You know, the good guys are watching what's happening in the bad world as well. And so I mentioned that there are many teams that will look for credentials that have been stolen and are being put up for sale on the internet, because it's all a money game, right? The bad guys are just trying to make money, and so they'll steal credentials and they'll turn around and start selling those to people that want to buy them. So the good guys are looking for that to happen, and if they see your credentials are being sold, what actions can they take? Well, they can do a lot actually. So, and I'll show you some of that. But attacker has your valid creds, he's going to go spear phishing, and root cause of 75% of all intrusions is compromised credentials. And so I want you to think about this question again. What is sitting between a bad actor with good creds in your environment today? Okay. And that then brings up one of the first things that I always like to talk to people about, some new patterns relative to enhancing your security in the world that we live in, specifically with cloud services. Okay. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and say, okay, we have this concept of identity as the control plane. Okay. So typically, if this is the world that you live in, meaning you may have some on-prem infrastructure, right? Classic pattern, it's been around a long time. You may have identities in your on-prem. When someone comes to work for you, they get a username and password, so they can log into your world, right? Your infrastructure, your solutions, etc. And typically that's on-prem. There also, you may be using cloud services. All of you here are using some cloud services. So the question is the login different for each cloud service that you are using versus the corporate login. Meaning, when you go sign up for X Cloud Service 1, maybe it's some SaaS service, do you set up usernames and passwords in that? And they're independent and disconnected from usernames and passwords from when you came to work, et cetera, et cetera. And the more cloud services you get, you can see the proliferation and the challenges that brings with it. So to solve that, this is typically the world that people live in. You have my on-prem world, I have my little VPN tunnel to get me back to my on-prem world, and then I have all these various cloud services, and I have a separate account there, and it's not really well integrated. So as the cloud services proliferate, it just gets worse, right? And then you've got multiple devices that are trying to get to these, and separate accounts, and customers and partners, and you got too much stuff going on, and it's not being managed like it could be. So if you look at this and say, okay, let's introduce a new player in town, and we're gonna call this the identity provider. Okay, so what I'm showing you here, this is the common pattern of how authentication is moving and where it's going on the internet in general, and with security in the cloud. So as you introduce this concept of an identity provider, his job, he has several functions. Now, just a quick point here, is Active Directory an identity provider? It sure sounds like it, right? What is Active Directory's job? Well, he has users and passwords. He has information about users and groups and computers, right? And all the attributes about a user. So it sure sounds like that's an identity provider. But technically speaking, Active Directory by itself is not an identity provider. Okay, so if you have Active Directory, don't think you're good to go and you have an identity provider. If you have, and the reason why I say that is an identity provider is introducing a completely new pattern of how authentication takes place. That little red dot around that on-prem world, that's your castle wall. And things that are inside that castle wall have a certain way of doing authentication. It's been around for 20 plus years. I'll throw out some protocols. It's Kerberos authentication. It's NTLM authentication. It may be LDAP authentication, right? Those types of authentication patterns, those are not your typical internet authentication patterns that take place with cloud services. There's a new game in town, and it's called federated authentication. And so federated authentication relies on this role of a service called the identity provider. The idea is that you can have a centralized identity provider that does the authentication, and then it has a trusted relationship with each of the cloud providers or each of the application that is being used in your environment. So you show, okay, the mobile devices, the computers, the users themselves, and then all the applications begin being integrated to the identity provider directly. Okay, so that now allows you to say, okay, when users authenticate to fill in the blank, DocuSign, Salesforce, Box, Concur, you name it, then those applications in the cloud are out of the business of doing authentication. Okay, so think about that. If you go to your cloud app and you have to put username and password in the cloud app and they're collecting those creds, then you're not using a federated authentication pattern. Okay, when you are using federated authentication, you go to the cloud apps, or you go directly to the identity provider and log in. Either pattern works, of course. And at the end of the day, you end up at the identity provider for the authentication event. Now that our authentication is happening there at the IDP, the identity provider, that's that report that I showed you, right? That was technically coming out of Azure Active Directory as an identity provider. And so he tracks and logs everything about, oh, where did you log in from? What time of day? What user agent? Et cetera, et cetera. And once he knows who you are, then he can also make authorization decisions to say, are you allowed to access that application? We know who you are now because you've authenticated. Are you now authorized to go access Salesforce from a high level? Can you get to Salesforce or not, right? And he can enforce that. So this here is known as federated authentication, and it's the future of how authentication is going to happen on the internet. Okay. So you want to get to this model here. Okay. And that identity provider, we JourneyTEAM, we work with two of the big ones. We work with Microsoft's Azure Active Directory, and we also work with Okta into that space. Okay. So as you get into the identity provider sitting in there, that introduces the concept of answering that question I asked, what sits between a bad guy and your data in the cloud? And typically the answer is a username and a password. Okay. Well, usernames and passwords are just so quaint, and they're so dated. So we're going to introduce something better than a username and password. And that's known as additional security verification or two-step authentication, or what I like to call it, multi-factor authentication. Okay. And if you guys aren't using this kind of pattern with your identities, then your risks go way up. Because once again, the only thing sitting between your data and the bad guy is a username and a password. And those can be compromised or phished, or some other site can be hacked and then they can be obtained and then they can be leveraged on other sites, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So, all right, so trivia question. If you go to a website and it gives you a login form, right? And it asks you for a username and password, and you enter that, and then it immediately asks you for your mother's maiden name, and you know that, and then it asks you for your favorite school teacher's last name, and you enter that, and you answered all three of those questions right, meaning your password, mother's maiden name, and your favorite school teacher's name, and it lets you into the system. Did you just perform multi-factor authentication? Okay. Maybe we should have a quick poll on that, but I think you guys get the answer there, right? The answer is no, you technically did not perform multi-factor authentication. And that is because on the planet that we live here today, there are three ways of identifying who you are, okay? There is something that you know, like your username and password, and all three of those methods I just described is all stuff you know. So technically speaking, you used one factor, okay? And a bad guy can figure out what you know, okay? So true multi-factor authentication is the combining two or more of these three factors that exist on the planet. What you know, what you physically have, a mobile phone, a USB dongle, or something that you carry with you, and or what you are, your fingerprint, your facial recognition, et cetera, right? So that's the three factors that make up multi-factor authentication. Now, I mentioned earlier this concept of as we raise the security bar. So raise your hand if you would love to do multi-factor authentication by knowing something and either having something or proving what you are every time you logged in, right? The security guys love that, right? Because it's very secure. Now what sits between your data and a bad guy? Well, you physically have to have your phone, or you physically have to have your computer, or you've got to chop off the guy's thumb and have his thumbprint, right? To log into the account. And so the security bar goes way up when you introduce multi-factor authentication. But if you require that on every login, users likely aren't going to be very happy, okay? And I don't know about you guys, but I log in, I don't count how many times a day I log into a system, okay? And how many different systems I log into. right? So I don't want to have to put my go through multi-factor authentication every single time. So there's technology out there that I mentioned earlier, right? So if they detect risky behavior, then they can take real-time corrective action at that moment of time. So for example, we call that adaptive, or a good example is velocity travel, right? Typically you log in from wherever you are going to the office and work, or you log in from home, or this city, etc. And if then a login event is taking place from somewhere on the planet that you physically cannot travel to that fast from the last login, then we have a pretty good idea that a bad guy has your password. Okay, and so the system can say, oh, when I detect velocity travel that's impossible, then I need to take corrective action right now. Okay, this is not just a little dashboard that you're going to go look at a week later and say, oh, look, someone logged in from Africa. Wonder what that was about. And then you have to go call people. This is the system real time saying, oh, this doesn't look very like good behavior. And it then will say, you have to have another, you have prove another way that you are, I need something more than username and password. Okay, usernames and passwords, I would love for them to say that they will be gone in the next 2 years, and that the functionality will be evolved and we'll have something more secure than username and password. But my reality side of me says usernames and passwords are going to be with us for the next 10 years at least. But we have to augment that with other factors. So we want to use multi-factor for this. So I'm just going to jump over here real quick. I'm going to stop the slide deck for a second, and I'm going to bring up and just show you what can be involved with multi-factor authentication. Okay, so let me share my other browser here, and I'm going to go share this browser. Okay, so I'm going to plug in here a username, and I'm going to log in here, and this is going to be a demo of enrolling somebody for multi-factor authentication. So the administrator has set up a policy that says, okay, for this user, they have to be set up for multi-factor authentication. And so after entering their successful credentials, the admin has required them to set up this account for additional security information. Okay, so they walk through this process, right? And this is a one-time setup about how to be set up for multi-factor. And I'm demoing Azure Active Directory multi-factor authentication here. Okay, so the user gets to pick how they want to be contacted, or what's their other factor. Okay, how should we contact you? And there's a few options here. You as the administrator can determine how many of these options show up for the end user. Okay, the authentication phone, that's where you either get a phone call or a text message sent to a phone. I do not recommend using text messaging for proving that you have your phone. That's the least secure method of proving that you have a device, is by receiving a text message. Okay, so I prefer the mobile app option, okay, and I prefer to receive notifications. So this is what we call push notification, right? So this use case here, once I finish setting this up, right, the user would log in, and all of a sudden it'll say, hey, I'm sending a push notification to your device, and that goes through, and you accept it on your phone. Now, for my use case, right, my phone is locked automatically after 30 seconds of use. And so it's really easy for me to get through that screen lock, though, because my push notification shows up on my phone, I swipe, I then have to unlock my phone with my fingerprint. So for me, that's 3 factors, right? I've entered my password, a push notification was sent to my phone, I went to accept that and had to physically unlock my phone via my thumbprint, and then I could accept the login notification. And all of that takes me about maybe 2 seconds. Okay, and so the bar for that is very easy. I don't have to type a code in. I don't have to get a text and read a number and type it in. I don't have to get a phone call. It's just very simple. Okay, so let me just set this up. This is a real example. I love live examples. And so on my mobile device right now, I'm using the Microsoft Authenticator app, right? And I go to that and I simply add an account, and it tells me what to do here, right? Hey, go add the Microsoft Authenticator app and hit add an account. I'm adding my work or school account. I'm pointing my phone camera at the screen. It picks up the QR code. It's added that account to my Authenticator app. I then go next, right? It's then going to send a push notification to my phone and validate that that's properly set up, okay? And once I go through that, then I am enrolled and ready to use multi-factor authentication, okay? So here comes the push verification. There's the approved sign-in request. It's got the username on there. I hit approve on my phone. I just did that. Meanwhile, the system's waiting to see, oh yeah, I really have my phone, right? There's another step here. If I lose access to my phone or lose access to the mobile app, for example, I can plug in a phone number here and use that as another method to like receive a phone call or something, okay? Now, this little thing here, I'm just going to make a note about this. This is important to understand from a security posture. In the world that we live in today, there are applications that don't have a clue what multi-factor authentication is, okay? And as such, a lot of the multi-factor authentication solutions out there will support this concept of application passwords, okay? And so that's the idea where, okay, because you may be using an app that doesn't understand how to do multi-factor authentication, it's expecting to send a username and password and get told yes or no, period, end of story. Then the multi-factor authentication solution says, well, to deal with those types of apps, I have to use these things called app passwords. And really all this is it's another username and password that the system generates and sticks on your account that can be leveraged by these, what I call dumb apps, okay, for lack of a better term, right? They're not apps that support this new modern authentication flow that can handle, oh, that was a successful first authentication, username and password. Now I'm sending a push notification to your phone. Wait for that to get approved, and if not, don't assume the authentication was successful, right? So you as the administrator can determine whether you support app passwords or not. They're a pain in the butt. Users hate them because who's going to remember this password, right? BZCQW, it's terrible, right? You can't change it, you can't set it. It is what it is. And so in this use case, it's saying, okay, I'm giving you an app password. I recommend just turning that off. Now, the only risk to that is that means that those dumb apps that can't support multi-factor don't get authentication now, okay? So I just enrolled for multi-factor authentication, right? It's now asking me to say, hey, let me make sure I've got information in case you forget your password, and I'll walk you through how to get that set up again, right? So let me just show you this here. And we'll walk through here. So now it's doing multi-factor because I'm changing account settings, right? It's sending a push notification to my phone. I swipe, I unlock, I hit verify, and I'm good to go that way. And now I can go finish setting up my account in this little demo tenant that I've got. Okay, so that's an example of a user getting enrolled in multi-factor. Once they're set up like that, then like I said, you may not have to have the user do multi-factor every single time they log in, okay? Instead, then they may simply, you can set up a policy that controls when they have to do that authentication, okay? All right, so how are we doing on time?
You're doing pretty good on time, Eric. You have about probably about 10 more minutes, and then if anybody wants to ask questions while you're kind of doing the final part of your presentation, then we can turn it over to that as well.
Okay, cool. Let me jump back to the slide deck here. You should be seeing the slide deck. I'm going to build out this Okta slide deck. Like I said, I told you at Journey Team we do Azure AD and we do Okta. And Okta has a very comprehensive technical solution here for identity management. They kind of invented the term identity management as a service, or IDaaS, IDaaS. You've heard of SaaS, right? This is identity as a service. And so they have lots of functionality. They've got single sign-on. They've got a universal directory that does all your identity integrations. It's actually a very, very awesome engine. Meaning, think of the vision here where a new employee is going to start, and so you put them into your HR system. And by nature of putting them in your HR system and flagging them as their start date is on this date, then the system will automatically pull that user into the identity system and will create them a username and password. It will then provision them into, say, Office 365. It may provision them down into your Active Directory environment if you have that. And it then provisions them with an email account. Well, the email address comes from the email system. So it grabs the email address from the email system and brings it back and then pushes that over into the HR system. So all of this identity synchronization, right, that's a completely different use case from simply single sign-on or multi-factor authentication event. They can handle all that with these universal directory and their directory integration stuff. Okay, so it's a similar pattern with federated authentication, and it hooks to all kinds of solutions and services. So, all right. So a little bit more about just identity management in the cloud. I asked the question at the beginning, is your data more secure by being in the cloud or not? And to quote a friend of mine that I was having this discussion with, he says, it's almost laughable to think that your data is less secure in the cloud. And where we were coming from on this is when you look at the security posture that Okta or Azure Active Directory bring to the table relative to single sign-on and risk-based authentication, what would it take for you to generate that report that I showed, right, without using one of these identity management as a service solutions? Right? Could you tell me everywhere on the planet that someone logged in, at what time of day, with what user agent, from what source IP address, and show me a nice heat map of that, right? And then could you put a policy in place that said, whoa, if you detect weird travel, make the user right now do multi-factor authentication. Or if you detect the fact that that username and password is being sold on the internet and bad guys are buying it and trying to use it, if you see that happening, next time the user logs in, make them change their password right now. And to change their password, they physically have to have their phone as that second factor to prove that they really are the right person, right? What does it take for you to set up technology to do that? So, and that's just literally the tip of the iceberg as far as the security posture and functionality that you get with these cloud services, okay? And so I have a whole other session that I do about how the small and medium businesses compete with the Fortune 500. And the short version of that is that anybody now, these solutions and these technical security solutions, they're being used by 1 and 2 employee companies, and they're being used by 300,000 employee companies. And it's the same technology. And your ability to access those services is the renaissance of computing, in my opinion. That's known as cloud computing and the services that it brings. So it's really a fantastic time that we live. Some statistics about Azure AD, they do a lot, right? They handle 1.3 billion authentication events every day. And from that signal, they determine, oh, there's a bunch of invalid username and password logins happening from these IP addresses. Let's put those as risky. And if someone logs in from them, you've got to do multi-factor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they're here to stay. They can scale and they can handle things that, you know, no typical company or enterprise is going to manage on their own. Okay, and then do you have what it takes yourself to do this, right? Do you have the expertise, the resources, the time to keep up on all the cybersecurity stuff? And I say that's challenging, right? The world we live in and how quickly things change, it's hard to stay ahead of the relentless cyber attacks that are coming. That's the value of hooking into these cloud services that offer that security posture for you. Okay, I'm going to quickly shift gears, and we've covered authentication and single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. I'm going to introduce something that Microsoft calls Azure Information Protection. And we talked about, you know, your castle wall and your data is not living behind your castle wall necessarily anymore. And this is a function, a feature that really is changing the game from a security posture. Instead of putting a perimeter around your data to try to protect it and then keeping the data inside that perimeter, this allows you to literally apply the encryption and the protection on the data itself. Okay, so Azure Information Protection in conjunction with Azure Rights Management Services, those hook into also a term you may have heard called data leakage protection. That all helps you to put the security and the classification on the data itself, and then we can govern where that data goes and who has access to that data. So the idea there being, here's the use case, right? I launch something in Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, any of those Office suites. And if I'm dealing with content that falls under a policy that you say, ooh, this needs to be classified in this method. Maybe it's confidential or highly confidential. Define your data classification, then the protection will automatically classify that data as confidential. And with the classification, it can optionally encrypt that data. Okay, and so users can see inside the Office suite, they can see, oh, this data has been classified, and or if this data has been encrypted. And when the data becomes encrypted, so there's two levels. There's classification, right, and then there's encryption. And you can mix and match those however you want. You can encrypt without classifying them or labeling them, or you can label them without encrypting them, whatever you want. So when the data becomes encrypted, then anything that tries to open that content, it sees the encryption on it and either, understands that there's encryption on it and it knows where to phone home to see if you have access to this data, or it cannot understand the encryption and you can't read the data. Okay, so think of this. Think of your Excel spreadsheet with all your company financials in it. Okay, and you're like, I got to protect that document, right? Today you control that based on what? Physically, who has access to it? Well, a much better approach is to say, I'm going to apply data encryption to that Excel spreadsheet. And then when I double click it and it opens up in Excel phones home to the Microsoft Azure Rights Management Service, and it says, you have to log in and prove who you are. So you log in with your corporate account. Now that it knows who you are, it says, what permissions do you have to this Excel document? And what can you do with this Excel document? And it starts saying stuff like, you're the owner of the Excel document. Okay, no problem. You can do whatever you want with it. Or, you can only view this Excel document. You cannot edit it. You cannot copy contents out of it and paste them into something else. It literally blocks copy and paste. You can't take a screenshot of this Excel document, right? You hit print screen, it goes black. So those are the encryption functionality that starts getting brought to the table with the Azure Information Protection and Azure Rights Management, okay? So you can also then track and revoke access to this data. So who has opened this Excel document? What time of day? From where on the planet? Et cetera, who accessed it. The other thing I want to just say is when you use these cloud services, they bring a bunch to the table relative to regulations and governance. Okay, so in other words, everything that is done is typically audited, or you can enable auditing. Okay, and this has saved my customers behinds multiple times. I've got several emails where they sent me an email saying, "Thank you for telling me to turn on auditing on Exchange Online mailboxes," right? Because a bad guy got credentials, logged into the guy's mailbox, and we had to answer the question, what did he read? What did he delete? What did he forward? What did he download? And mailbox auditing will tell you all of those details, right? And we'll track everything like that. Anything an administrator does can be tracked and audited. So the security posture in cloud services, once again, it's almost laughable to think that you can do it better with your own services. So that's a little bit about Azure Information Protection. So in WrapUp, okay, Microsoft Okta, they have a very comprehensive security story for identity access management. And like I said, you've seen the tip of the iceberg. Identity is the center of it all, okay? That's one of the reasons why I love identity access management, because it touches everything. If applications need to know who you are and what you can do, right? And how you govern what they can do based on their group membership or based on the attributes that are appropriate to that user, is all part of the authorization framework. And you have to invest in implementing your security posture in the cloud. Yes, you have access to world-class, fantastic security solutions, but you still have to architect and plan and implement, okay? The SaaS services make it easy, right? Their whole marketing pitch is it's easy. You can click the next, and give me your credit card and you're ready to rock and roll. And that's, you know, you guys are using cloud services. I think most of you can say, yeah, if you just turn the business loose and say go use it, it's not always the best outcome. So there is planning and governance that does need to be put in place, okay? And that's kind of the summary. So that's a little bit about what I had to go over. I don't know, Dave, if you want to take it over, if there's any questions that have come in or anything that anyone wants to bring up as far as, you know, if you have a question you want to chat to us or anything like that, we'd be happy to answer any of those.
Thank you, Eric. We appreciate it. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, we'll be happy to answer that, or even answer those offline. You know, cybersecurity really can cripple businesses. We hate hearing the horror stories where some type of data is compromised, the business is hurt, or even to the point that it really cripples the business for a significant amount of time. And so any of these ideas or coming up with strategies, Eric can help set up those strategies for you, and whether it's a short-term and long-term piece, as well as JourneyTEAM. We have a variety of pieces out there, and having the multi-year strategic posturing of cybersecurity really is going to help your guys' businesses. And so we'll make sure to email out some of the information that was shared today to everybody that participated. And that's all we have. Thank you for attending.